Lux Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.
The lady is my mistress, I lack nothing. She allows me to lie down in green pastures. She leads me beside quiet waters. She refreshes my soul. She guides me along the secret paths for her name's sake. Though I walk through the lands of the dead, I will fear no evil. For you are with me. Your key and torch, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all of the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of Magick forever. Amen. That was a rewritten version of Psalm 23. Hello and welcome to Lux Occult. This is a podcast where we gleefully taunt the mundane, butcher the Latin and most other languages, and we also discuss a variety of occult topics. I'm your host, Lux Estrada, and if you're hearing the sound of my voice, that means that Magick and this show are for you if you want them. There are a lot of different ways to be more free in this world, and using magic or making space for a spiritual practice in your life can be one of them. As always, I don't speak for anybody but myself. Others can, will, and should disagree sometimes. How we ever learn anything if we all agreed about everything all the time, after all? Unlike those who attempt to be reasonable should be willing to do, I'm always willing to revise my opinions based on new evidence. Alright, very excited to present another great episode to you all. Psychoanalyst, author, artist, occultist, and host of the Rendering Unconscious podcast, Dr. Vanessa Sinclair, joined me to talk about the cut-up method and how it can be applied in one's magical practice. We get into a bit of the history surrounding the cut-up technique with Burroughs and Geisen, Genesis Peorage, and David Bowie, and talk about how cut-ups can be constructed. Dr. Sinclair and I demonstrate by producing a cut-up poem together during the interview, and she shares some advice and about some of her experiences sort of having a foot in multiple worlds. We get into Freud and analyzing dreams and much, much more. I recently took a very cool class with Vanessa and her husband, Carl Abrahamson, which was very inspirational, and I'm stoked to share some of what we talked about there with you all, as well as for you all to hear today's episode within the episode. For that, I spoke with Derek Hunter about his new book, Anonymous Agnostic Antichrists, which looks at how the works attributed to William Shakespeare might have actually been the result of a large group of what Derek calls Renaissance-era punk rockers, playwrights, poets, and thinkers who operated on the margins of what was acceptable at the time. Perhaps the bard was not a person, but is a sort of egregore which spun out of the multifaceted hyper-sigil that is the Shakespeare plays. I don't know. We'll touch on it. This is, of course, a controversial topic, and it's been fascinating being on the sideline for some of Derek's dives down the rabbit hole on the subject. As a person who is prone to taking recursive interests in things myself, I can appreciate a healthy obsession in others. In the short discussion Derek and I have, there's a lot to consider regarding the power of narrative and much more. Before we get any further into things, I'd like to say thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you taking the time to hang out with me and my very rad guests here on this show. As I'm fond of saying, time is of course one of the few zero-sum games we play in this life, so thank you so much for spending some of yours here with us. As somebody who is pretty introverted, I don't use social media all that often. It's kind of a lot. Not on there every day or anything like that, but that definitely doesn't mean that I don't enjoy hearing from you all. I'm quite lucky to have very, very cool listeners, collaborators, cohorts, co-conspirators, etc. I always welcome people's thoughts, questions, comments, suggestions, or arcane revelations. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com, or you can get me on Instagram at luxoccultpod. I'll give a few shout-outs to people later on in the listener mail and shout-out segment. If you like the show and the other work I've been getting into, you can support it on Patreon. If you do so, you can take a bibliomancy break with me. No tiers or levels exist, so give as you will. Buy Me a Coffee is also an option for those who wish to show their support with a one-time donation. Thank you so much to everybody who is already doing so. Your support in the monetary form makes this show possible by allowing me to cover the expenses associated with making it, and this allows me to justify the time that I spend. I really appreciate the opportunity to be making this show. It means a lot to me, and having the resources necessary is thanks to all of you, so I appreciate it a lot. All right. Lots of fun stuff in store for you all. Stoked to introduce my first guest here today. Dr. Vanessa Sinclair is a psychoanalyst, author, artist, and occultist based in Sweden. In her psychoanalytic practice, she works with people online internationally. She is the host of Rendering Unconscious podcast and the founder of the Psychoanalysis, Art, and the Occult series of events. Together with her husband, Carl Abrahamsson, she posts exclusive content about creativity and magic every week on their Patreon. Their posts about magic and creative practices have been anthologized as 2 books thus far. It's Magic Monday Every Day of the Week, which came out in 2021, and We May Need to Call on Our Cosmic Friends, Magic Monday Part 2, which was 2023. She is author of The Pathways of the Heart, Scansions in Psychoanalysis and Art, The Cut in Creation, and Switching Mirrors. She's also the editor of Psychoanalytic Perspectives on the films of Ingmar Bergman, From Freud to Lacan and Beyond, Rendering Unconscious, Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Politics and Poetry, Outsider Inpatient, Reflections on Art as Therapy, with Elizabeth Punce, on Psychoanalysis and Violence, Contemporary Lacanian Perspectives, with Manja Steinkeller, and The Fenris Wolf Volume 9, and The Fenris Wolf Volume 11 with Carl Abrahamsson. All kinds of cool stuff there. All right, fuck yeah. So leading us into my conversation with Dr. Sinclair will be an audio cut-up she created. If you listen close, you will find that there are a lot of fun tie-ins with what we are going to discuss in the interview. Perhaps a few Easter eggs for you all to find. I don't know. All right, this is The Third Mind, featuring Caitlin Fossey, from Message 23 by Vanessa Sinclair.
I'll always be a word man. It's no calligraphy for French prose. He's closely, I'm quite sure, one of my favorites.
A spiral, a serpent,
Abraxas is. It's not sacred, okay, with situated and matter.
Wearing the big white hat. Seems to be in a hurry, but where he's going, he'll have time and nothing but. And none of the good citizens of Chicago is exactly...
The third mind is when 2 minds collaborate. Brian Geisman.
Your anti-conservative dial has been ratified that the access code is restrained. Press the dial at only 1 or 0 before the 5-digit code or contact the carrier for help.
Dedicated to the mysterious, the unusual, and sometimes the supernatural. A program of
here because you are here. And let me quote to you, young officers.
The third mind is when 2 minds collaborate.
No 2
Brian
minds
Geisman
ever come
collaborating
together
this
without
manual
thereby
elementary
creating a
becomes more
third
creative,
mind,
and writers'
invisible,
illusion techniques
intangible
retraces a
force,
series of such
which may
collaborations.
1, 2...
yes,
Reasons why the artistic world can't operation rewrite Maya, illusion.
Now, these experiments started not on tape
Thanks
recorders,
again,
but
our
on
work
paper.
continues to unfold.
Have a lot of
In
spiral
1959, Brian Geisman said that writing is 50 years behind
by the
painting.
passerby, few
He
know
applied
the
the
clients to
montage
write.
technique to words on a paper.
I'll always be a word man. It's no calligraphy for French prose. He's closely, I'm quite sure, one of my
a
favorites.
spiral, a serpent,
Abraxas
electricity,
is.
and elemental.
It's not sacred, okay with it,
Atonal.
but we physical. Indeed, the final across the world glow, spiritual and physical.
Sacrifice ourselves, stop this cycle.
Thanks again, I look continues to unfold.
Have a
The
lot of
spiral.
people.
Special zone will tell you when the line is free.
Representation of my
Please hang up
spiritual
now.
more.
By the passerby, few know the clients to become a master of yore. By no fewer than 100, it seems to work more than those who are. Be the true self, where is situated, and matter cross
Becoming
structures.
master of your be the true self.
All right, well, my guest today is Dr. Vanessa Sinclair. How are you doing today, Vanessa?
I am doing well. How are you?
Really excited to talk with you today about cut-ups and all kinds of other cool stuff.
It's so nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I was hoping that we could start out with a sort of general definition and a little bit of background about what is the cut-up method for anybody out there who might be living under a rock and hasn't heard of it yet.
Absolutely. So the basic kind of history that I usually give starts with Tristan Tzara in the early 1900s, like the 19 teens, and the Dada movement and the Cabaret Voltaire. And of course, the Cabaret Voltaire started in Zurich because World War I was happening and artists were fleeing, and Switzerland was a neutral country, and so it was a safe place for people to go to get away from the war. And a bunch of artists kind of got together in Zurich with local artists that were already there. Emmy Hennings and Hugo Ball from Germany had started this kind of literary cabaret called the Cabaret Voltaire, where basically she would sing songs and he would play piano to accompany her. And, you know, they started collecting new artists, and Tristan Tzara was one of them. And he ended up calling these poems that he created accidental poems, and they were originally done live. So he would basically cut up an article from the newspaper and put all of the words, individual words, in a hat, and then he would pull them out on stage and recite the poem as the words came out randomly out of the hat. And he noticed, and so did the people around him, that even though these words were just cut from some random newspaper and just thrown into a hat and pulled out at random, somehow they made a certain kind of sense. And there's lots of, debate about why that is. Is it because we just naturally make meaning out of things? Is it because there's some sort of unconscious communication happening? Is it something like spiritual? Different people have different ideas around it, but that's the basic method. And then I'm sure other people worked with it throughout the years, but we don't really, in art history, quote unquote, know of any major artists using the cut-up method and calling it that until the 1950s, late 1950s in the Beat Hotel, when Brian Geisen discovered the cut-up method on his own, not being so familiar with Tristan Tzara's method. In his case, he was a visual artist, and he was laying out like canvas to cut to paint on, and he had newspapers underneath the canvas. And when he was cutting the size canvas he wanted with his X-Acto knife, he cut through the canvas and through the newspapers that were underneath. And he saw that the way the pages fell together when he cut top layers away, that the sentences that came from like an underlying page and an overlaying page also made a certain kind of sense. And then he got really obsessed with doing this and thought they were hilariously funny, and like basically called William Burroughs in and was like, look at this, you just cut up these papers at random and they come together making these sentences from different pages, and they like are hilarious and really meaningful. And that's, my experience as well, like kind of like bibliomancy as well, which I know you like, things like that. You do these random occurrences, but somehow they have this uncanny effect. And then, of course, lots of artists since then have used it. Genesis Bjorge and the Topi Crew, Kathy Acker, Dodie Bellamy. There's all sorts of poets and artists who use the cut-up method. And then you can also think about, collage itself is a sort of cut up. Film editing is a sort of cut up. DJing, splicing different music together is a sort of cut up. So you can kind of apply the idea to all different realms besides just the like literary and poetic word.
So I took a fantastic class taught by you and your partner in crime, Carl Abrahamson, called Harnessing the Magic and Creative Power of the Cut-Up. And within that, you talked a little bit about some of your personal daily practice with, how you use this technology. Could you comment a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was a really fun class. I knew it was going to be fun when Morbid Anatomy approached us to do a class on the cut-up method, but it was really magical and really fun and kind of just what I needed at that time, which always cut-ups are somehow, they're just really magical.
It was such a cool class. Yeah, it was fantastic.
It was really fun, and we decided on purpose. We knew like basically what we were going to talk about overall because, there's certain key players like we mentioned in the title, David Bowie, William Burroughs' Genesis Pure, that we wanted to hit upon, and we knew we were going to talk about the history a little bit in our practices, but we decided to kind of save it each week and develop the class ongoing as the weeks unfolded. And I also think that was a really good idea. Just like everything, I feel like things come together better when you don't try to pre-plan too much, and you kind of have like a general outline, but then you kind of let happy accidents happening in between and go with the flow. So that was really wonderful. Yeah. And one big thing that I'm just kind of processing now, actually, because I've had kind of a busy autumn, is that I got my notebooks back, that they were going to be my very first original cut up notebooks that I had from like 10 years ago. I finally got back from a publisher who had promised to publish a book back then that never really came to fruition. And I got them back like while we were doing the class. It was like doing the class on the cut up method, like called my books home finally, because I'd been trying to get them for so many years, and then they finally came. So that was really nice. And I'm just like going through them recently. Actually, yesterday I went into, Carl has like a little home studio in our attic, and I went into the studio yesterday and recorded like spoken word of these old original cut up poems that I made, like 10 years ago. And that was also very magical to kind of read these words. And I remember how meaningful they were when I made them, in this like Brian Geisen way, where he talks about how like uncanny and hilariously funny they are at the time. But then, of course, now being 10 years later and having worked with it so much more extensively than I had then, it just had like so many more layers of meaning. And that's really, it's really amazing to see how the work keeps like being generative over time. And I think that's something Carl's found. I mean, he's been doing cut-ups like since the 80s. And I know that's something that Genesis talked about when Genesis and I like were very close for a period. I remember Jen like looking through notebooks and like, I was writing about pandrogyny and the cut-up method from like a psychoanalytic perspective, which eventually evolved into this Scansion book that I know we're going to mention at some point. And Jen would say like, oh wow, this is like illuminating different aspects of my work that I hadn't thought of before, both looking through my archives again and also like looking at it from psychoanalytic lens, which Jen wasn't really familiar with, but of course their work is so profound and like fits the psychoanalytic theory so well. So it's just amazing that there's just like so many infinite layers to this kind of work, and it keeps generating new. And I think that does have a lot to do with this method of the cut itself. Like in the Scansion book, Scansion and Psychoanalysis and Art, the word scansion, the method scansion is like, it means, just making this cut. And it comes from this Lacanian theory. Jacques Lacan is a French psychoanalyst who died in 1981. He really wrote a lot and gave a lot of seminars from like the 1950s till the day he died. And he developed this method of scansion where instead of like having a therapy session be, 50 minutes or an hour or something, a set amount of time, he actually would cut the session off when he felt like the patient had gotten to like a real insight or an aha moment. He would just say, let's stop there. So the person could leave kind of in that stunned state where you like, put something together in your life, like, oh wow, this, person I'm dating now is just like my mother or whatever, something classic.
So Lacan would be good. Go think about that now, right? Like
to make a joke of us, but it happens when you have that kind of realization.
Sure.
Lacan would be like, "Oh, right, we'll stop there," and then you can leave thinking about that, and then you end up thinking about it all day. I've been through a Lacanian analysis, and it really is like when you're in the middle of talking and you make this realization, and then your analyst is like, "Yeah, let's stop there." It's like they just like hit you in the face. I mean, it's just like a real shock. You're like, "What do you mean?" But then you kind of leave stunned, and you end up like ruminating about it. And the idea is that then it keeps your unconscious like engaged and working all the time, so that you're doing the analysis not just in session, but like all the time. And he would also meet with people more often. Like the session might only be 20 minutes, but you'd come in the next day. Like you'd come in like every day, 4 days a week, 5 days a week, something like that. It would just like facilitate this ongoing process of analysis. And it really does get the analysis going in like, a way where it's just like happening all the time. Whereas sometimes some people do that kind of naturally, where once they get into the analytic process, they start thinking about that all the time. That's what happened to me. It's happened to Carl, I think, too, because he was in like a 5-day analysis for 5 years as well. 5-day-a-week analysis, I should say, for like 5 years. But some people, and it's a defensive measure, and it might be necessary for some people, which is why I don't cut sessions. But some people will end up like coming to a realization, but then you kind of see them like backing away from it the rest of the session instead of like diving in. They're kind of like, whoa, what was that realization? And they kind of put all their defenses back in place and leave with like on a really like nice note where everything's like tied in a bow, and like, that then the session has ended and it's contained to that hour, and they're not going to be thinking about it the rest of the day. And so he was trying to keep that from happening. But of course, yeah, in my view, and I think it's true, sometimes people need that. Sometimes people need to leave their shit in that hour, so they're not ruminating about it all the time. Because some people, like, if you have panic attacks, it's something that's like intrusive or obsessive thinking where you can't stop thinking about it. Like, sometimes it's really helpful for people to contain it into that hour. So that's why I don't cut sessions. But I think the idea is interesting, that cutting something ends up like generating and keeping the unconscious open. And I think the cut-up method does that as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it also makes a lot of sense to sometimes, keep things contained to this magic circle, if you will, of the session.
Exactly.
So, speaking of psychoanalysis, since we're on the topic, this is a bit of a hokey question, but forgive me. I'm curious though, is there like a person from popular culture or history, or maybe an occultist of some kind that you've ever thought like, man, I wish I could sit down and conduct some analysis with that person and get into stuff?
I had never thought of that before somehow until you mentioned that. But who would I want on the couch? Oh my gosh, maybe Sabina Spielrein, actually. Yes, because she was, I don't know if you've seen Cronenberg's film A Dangerous Method, and Keira Knightley plays this woman, Sabina Spielrein, who's a Russian psychoanalyst. She's like one of the first women psychoanalysts, and she was actually a patient of Carl Jung's, and she ended up, like, her parents put her in his hospital because she was hysteric, as, happened to every woman back then. She's acting out, let's lock her up. And then, she was really smart, and she understood the theory and the analysis, and ended up in analysis with Jung, and ended up becoming a student and not just a patient. And then, of course, they had a love affair, as they do back then. So that whole thing happened. And then on the other side of that, she also wanted to work with Freud. So she was Freud's student and used to travel to Vienna to meet with him, and he'd supervise cases for her, things like that. And when Freud and Jung had their like huge split, in 1913, she's one of the few people that stayed in touch kind of with both of them, and still continued to be Freud's student and can still continue to work with Jung. So I think she'd be really interesting to talk to, actually. I know she's not a magician or occultist, but I think she's such an interesting figure, and we only know, like, the most stuff we know about her is from her diaries, which is what that film, The Dangerous Method, is based on. It's based on her diaries. And since the book was written, that Cronenberg made that film out of, they found like another whole box of her journals and diaries and writings. Like, I guess she was still in Zurich at that time, and she fled and went back to Russia, and then ended up being killed, like everybody at that time. So yeah, so they found a whole nother box of like her writing and her journals and stuff. And I'm very interested to see what's going to come out of that as well. Cause I love reading. I'm kind of an analytic nerd, and I love reading their diaries and their letters to each other, because it's not their like formal papers that are in journals. You get their like personal kind of personalities, and them like not being so rigid and not trying to be so proper and professional. Like Freud, there's a whole book of Freud's letters to the woman who he ended up marrying, Martha Bernays, when he was like just starting out as like a little mini baby doctor, and like, getting this internship or whatever, and getting to work with Charcot and stuff, and going to these parties and talking to other doctors. And he was doing like copious amounts of cocaine, like all the time. Like he did cocaine like all day, every day for like 15 years or something, like wild. And of course this was all legal then, and they were doctors and they had access to this stuff. But you're like, no wonder he wrote so many books, and like he famously like only slept like 4 hours a night, and it was like writing all the time. And yeah, and he would even say like in these letters to his wife to be like, I really impressed so and whatever, and I did some cocaine before I went to this party. It's just hilarious to read this stuff. I love it. Analytic gossip.
No, that is really funny.
Yeah, Freud would be fun to have on the couch too, but it would have to be that Freud. That like if we could catch him like in his 20s.
Yeah, young Freud. Okay.
Yeah, young Freud. Freud from the Netflix show. I don't know if you've seen the Netflix show Freud, but if you haven't, highly recommended. All these analysts got so pissy and mad about it because it's basically like these guys like fan fiction about Freud where they just like made up, there's like a part of his life where like his letters and his writings are like lost or whatever. And so they just like made up this story about like what might have happened during this time. And it's totally witchy and occult. And like, you know, he goes to seances and there's hysterics and he's having sex with everyone. And, you know, there's like parties with orgies and it's amazing. It's like an amazing show. And all these analysts got so mad. Like, that's not what Freud was really like. And it's like, maybe it was, you know, what do you know? I think it's great.
That does sound very amusing.
It's really fun.
So for people that aren't familiar with the differences between psychoanalysis and psychology, would you mind just giving like a very quick breakdown there?
Sure. I would say the main difference is psychoanalysts think a lot more about positioning and like the positions people take with each other. And I feel like, you know, if you're queer at all, it's really helpful to understand the theory because it's kind of like a top bottom thing where it's like, you know, who's on top in this situation. And basically like psychoanalysts, when you go into a room and you're, you know, going to this authority or whatever, the idea is that the patient, the person coming in, you know, goes to this person assuming they're the authority, like they're on top, right? Yeah. And a psychologist would be like, yes, I am on top. You know, I have the knowledge. I will give you the advice. I will give you the tools. You know, it's coming hopefully from like a place of care, wanting people to get better, but they'd be giving a lot of advice and like homework and worksheets and, you know, things to help you get better. And even for a while, this grosses me out. There's this strain of psychoanalysis that it turned into when it came to America called ego psychology, where they actually like theorized that the point of the treatment was so that the patient could identify with the healthy ego of the analyst or therapist and then internalize that. And then that's how they would become healthier. That's to me so disgusting.
That was really culty. Like,
yeah, that I don't like that. Yeah, no.
I'll make you a little mini version of myself. Yeah, I'm exactly. So great.
Exactly. That is not the way to go. So the analysis, and then of course there's all these different kinds of psychoanalysis too. It's ridiculous how many like divisions there are in everything in the world. That's how the world is. But anyway, the main difference between like psychology and psychoanalysis would be that the analyst knows that the person coming in might put you in that position of authority, but that at the end of the day, the authority is the person themselves. You know, they're the ones that really know what's going to be best for themselves. They just, you know, are stressed or have trauma or stuff, and they're having trouble accessing it. You know, they're caught up in repetitions from traumas from childhood or like relationship patterns that mirror, you know, the relationship they have with their parents or their parents' relationship with each other or something like that. But like at the end of the day, our job is not to insert ourselves and tell people what to do, but just kind of observe and try to ask questions and try to like ask people questions that'll help them look at things they might not be looking at, or like, you know, if they say a word like that's kind of vague, ask them like, what do they mean by that word, so they can kind of articulate themselves better rather than using like, oh, that's weird. You know, people say, oh, that's weird. It's like, okay, but what do you mean by weird? Trying to get people to get more specific so that they can really understand, like, what do I mean by weird? You know, what am I saying when I'm saying that? And just trying to help get people to be able to understand themselves better so that they can make better decisions in their lives. I think that's a huge difference. Now, of course, there's, of course, analysts who will be like super egomaniacs and still like think that they're the shit and oh, you should be like me or whatever. But in general, that's about, and I'm not saying all psychologists are like that, obviously, but I just think there's a different positionality in that way where it's like we're trying to eventually help people realize that they don't need us because we don't know better. You know, we don't know better. You ultimately, you know what's best for yourself. And I tend to, and, you know, you mentioned Topi. I tend to like be attracted to things like that. Like Topi's the same thing. It's like a group of people, but everybody's kind of an individual and nobody's like the leader. And, you know, it's like everybody kind of finds their own way that works best for them. And everyone supports everyone in doing that. I like things like that, you know.
Yeah, me too. Fuck yeah. Well, how do you feel about taking a bibliomancy break?
Let's do it.
Hey, fuck yeah. Hey, what's up? I'm Luxa.
And I'm Josh. Are you looking for a chill place to hang out online and chat about chaos magic, occultism, witchcraft, and more? Are you hoping to learn and share your knowledge and experience in a place that is welcoming to folks of all different backgrounds and identities?
If so, check out the Green Machine Discord server, home of the Green Mushroom Project and Administrism. Our growing community of chaotes, occultists, sorcerers, witches, and weirdos has all kinds of fun and interesting things going on. From chats and rituals to workshops, clubs, and more. There's a lot of cool opportunities to get involved.
Sounds great, Luxa. How can folks find us?
Well, for now, we're keeping things pretty small as we grow, so we're not advertising on any of the Discord services that do that. But folks can hit me up and I will send them a link. You can reach me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com, or you can find me on Instagram at luxoccultpod.
Fuck yeah!
Fuck yeah. Fuck yeah, indeed. Greetings, it's me, Luxa from the future. Thanks for listening. I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. We're going to be returning for more of my chat with Dr. Sinclair in a little bit here, as well as hearing that bibliomancy break and more. But now it's time for the episode within the episode. What if the bard, William Shakespeare, is less of a historical person who lived and more of an egregore or thought form, something created through a sort of collaborative hypersigil, if you will? I spoke with Derek Hunter about his new book, Anonymous, Agnostic, Antichrist, and about the research into this topic, as well as about the people behind the legend of the bard and their Renaissance-era punk rock ethos. A little bit about Derek here. After 30 years of blood, sweat, and research, and tears, Derek Hunter finally arrived at a story that made the most sense to him of who was the true author or authors behind the Shakespeare canon, the plays and poetry with William Shakespeare's name on them. Anonymous, Agnostic, Antichrist is Derek's 13th book and follows in the footsteps of previous works of fiction, combining the personal with the historical, the surreal with the real, specific occult experiences and practices while exploring universal themes in everybody's lives. Derek is the creator of his own mythos and way of life, Love Chaos, something which finds its way into not only his stories, but his personal life. And if you'd like to hear more about Love Chaos, you can hear Derek and I discuss it in episode 18, Love Chaos, Sex Magic with Derek Hunter of Love Chaos. There will be a link to that in the show notes. In Derek and I's short chat today, there's a lot that comes up about the importance of narrative and the media as being a powerful tool in influencing societies and individuals' perceptions of things. I'll be back after Derek and I chat to play a clip from an audio sigil I made about 3 years ago during the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction in December of 2020. Some of that work has ended up resurfacing recently, and you see a little piece of this during a bibliomancy reading that I'll perform for Dr. Sinclair after Derek and I chat. So later on, after that, I will talk nerdy to you about the number 23, do listener mail and shoutouts, and there's some updates about what we have going on with the Green Mushroom Project. So leading us into my chat with Derek here, I wanted to play a track from Fuck Around and Find Out Part 2, the Green Mushroom Project and We the Hollow digital mixtape. Big thanks to everybody who contributed to that. Keats Ross, who is the lead haunt over at We the Hollow and my sort of partner in crime on the mixtape project, has created a very cool magical tool, which I will tell you a little bit about later on. For now, I wanted to share one of the tracks that Keats contributed to the mixtape. Here is Coagula by Dakota Slim and Moon Division. Cheers.
Cast me out, alone and out home. And the spectre curse to breathe. You invoked my ghost, and all you hiccuped and choked. You fear small, mostly reprieve. Blinking between scenes, we are winging
All right. Well, my guest today is Derek Hunter. Derek, how's it going?
Hey, Lux, I'm doing great and doing fantastic. Just great to be here talking to you once again. It's just and talking about something I'm probably one of the biggest thing I'm most passionate about, which is Shakespeare or the creation of the Shakespeare canon. So absolutely very grateful to be here talking to you about that.
Fuck yeah. Well, I'm excited to hear about your new book. Can you tell us a little bit about what that's about? And
Sure. So it's called Anonymous Agnostic Antichrists. And so it's a book 30 years in the making. What it is that I fell in love with Shakespeare in my teens, early teens. And then I had to write an essay about the biography of Shakespeare and was enormously disappointed with what I found. And people say, well, we don't know much about Shakespeare. We actually have lots of information about Shakespeare, but everything that we have are just business transactions. He was a businessman, and there's like nothing to do with creativity. And there was plenty of his peers where there's basically what's called a literary paper trail, so that somebody left behind them that evidence that they were a writer. And this, you can't go based on title pages alone, because there was tons and tons of misattributions of who was the author of various different works at the time. So, but yeah, basically from there it started a 30-year quest to find out, well, okay, if it wasn't Shakespeare, then who did it? And it was just a very, it was an obsession on my part. I was losing my mind at times. I think I made you lose your mind a few times by
you never dragged me down with you, but I did enjoy vicariously watching you go through it. And like, whoa, this dude's like really into Shakespeare, and I respect
right, yeah.
obsession.
And so I was really just obsessed with it, and I had this timeline. So I had this time. I knew like many years ago. I was like, okay, I'm going to write a book. I want to write a fictional account. So like it's basically like a story, but a fictional account of who the true author was. And I had a deadline. So the deadline was December 5th of 2023. And the reason why I picked that date was that would be the 400th anniversary of the publication of the First Folio. The First Folio was the first collection of Shakespeare's plays. About half of the plays had been published before in smaller individualized versions called quartos. And so this was the first collection that had been published, and it was published, well, they don't have the exact date of when it was published, but the first recorded sale was to a widowed antiquarian named Edward Daring. Edward Daring recorded buying 2 copies of the First Folio on December 5th, 1623. So I wanted to release the book on that date. So it was a major undertaking these last 30 years. I finally came across something that was satisfying to me, and so it was Thomas North. And Thomas North was a person that this gentleman by the name of Dennis McCarthy had been working on for the last 15 years, showing with a great deal of evidence that Thomas North was the author of the original plays, which Shakespeare later adapted. And so I got to know Dennis these last couple years. There's another guy by the name of Michael Blanding, and he wrote a book about Dennis and about Thomas North that was a big seller, very popular book in 2021 called North by Shakespeare. And so I've gotten to know the two of them very well these last 2 years, and they were very excited that I was writing this book about Thomas North. The thing, though, for me was that it wasn't just Thomas North, it was other people. So there was other people who collaborated with Thomas North. The majority of plays back in those days were collaborations, and there was tremendous amount of rewriting and revision over the decades. So there would be a play written, say, as early as the late 1550s by Thomas North and somebody else, and that play would reappear over the decades and be written by Thomas North and other people, and it would change over the decades, and it finally resulted in, say, a play like The Winter's Tale.
So you're saying that it's not new to like have the same fucking thing over and over and over again?
Well, it's just that what we do see is that the consistent person connected is Thomas North. And I won't go into all the evidence because it would take a lot of time, but just know that if you check out Dennis McCarthy's work, he has like thousands of examples of where you see Thomas North's imprint on the Shakespeare canon. But for me, it was really the kicker was seeing these other people like Thomas Middleton, John Webster, who were absolutely brilliant writers, and many others, Christopher Marlowe, Thomas Kidd, Robert Greene, Ben Jonson, Richard Barnfield, Michael Drayton, Edmund Spenser, of course, who many people know, who was the poet behind the Fairy Queen. So all of these various different people who worked together with Thomas North as like the chief. And that was the clincher for me. Then it made sense because Thomas North on his own didn't make sense to me. I felt that he had to have help by other talented writers. And then from there, it was just a matter of like, just in addition to just writing about their personal stories was the philosophical aspect of what these people were doing. It was truly revolutionary. There was nobody had really done anything like the Shakespeare canon prior to it. There was a Shakespeare scholar who wrote this book called The Invention of the Human. His name was Harold Bloom, and he argued that basically Shakespeare invented like the human experience. Now, and he puts it forth in such a way where what that means is that for the first time in history, human beings were at center stage. So it wasn't about edifying any kind of religious philosophy. It wasn't any kind of divinity. It wasn't any kind of political or social purpose or agenda that had behind it. The primary purpose of the works was to focus on what it meant to be human. And this coincided also with the French philosopher Montaigne, who in the book in the book I wrote was a lifelong friend of Thomas North. So they both influence each other enormously. So it was definitely, I wanted to have it to show that these were radical people. They were English Renaissance, basically punks. Like they were very rebellious against the status quo, but they had to be very careful. And even with that, many of them lost their lives. People like Christopher Marlowe being the most famous, but many others suffered enormous consequences for the work that they did and the lives that they lived. So yeah, it was something I wanted to write a story where it gave credit to the right people that made the most sense to me, and in a way where showing too that these people were in many ways the originators of modern English language. many of what we use today in terms of words and phrases comes from this period. They created not only the modern English language, but in many ways the modern perceptions of ourselves. In terms of where we look at ourselves as the main focus of investigation, and that we ourselves worth like looking into. So I really wanted to chart their personal journeys while also showing how enormous they were in influencing society. And there was good, like over 20 people involved, not only the names I mentioned, but also Amélie Lanier. And she was a very powerful poet, a proto-feminist, who wrote this work that basically Adam was just as guilty of sin as Eve. And she did it in a very, she was a great poet in her time. And to this day, is really highly regarded. And other people like Mary Sidney and others, Etienne de Boissy, and Francis Bacon. There's just so many people who were involved that really, in many ways, created like the modern world.
Interesting. So Shakespeare is almost more of like a sort of egregore, if you will, a sort of like thought form that was created by all of these people together, in your view.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's what I really wanted to show, was that it was like you have one main person. So it really was Thomas North as the main person, but he understood the power of these other people, and he invited them. And then it was almost like this thing that was created that had this force. And so it was like an egregore that came out through these people that they all tapped into, and then it came through into the works. What I show in the book is that it happened organically, so like an egregore, so in a way where it's not a controlled human thing in a sense. Like it was like somehow there's an influence through similar ideas and perceptions that connect to each other between these people. But then there was also, I show too, that there were also secret occult orders that were going on at that time that were influencing things, and people like Thomas North and many of the others were involved in these. The thing with the Shakespeare canon is that you couldn't have it be through that long of a period of time, just be by accident, just produced onto the world. There was like a lot of accidents for sure, but there was definitely a concerted effort by certain human beings to make sure that this work was released onto the world.
Very interesting. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to getting into some of the more historical aspects of all this stuff when we talk about it on Ad Hoc History, but can you give the listeners and I a couple more tidbits about some of the occult things that you discovered in your research?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I think what people should know about the Shakespeare canon is that the most autobiographical character was a wizard, was Prospero. And so Prospero was the main character in the play The Tempest. So The Tempest is a play about an old man who has been basically exiled to this island with his daughter. And the play opens with a storm, and it's like a shipwreck. And the people on it were his brother, who was the one who ousted him from his position of power. But Prospero is a very powerful wizard. He has enormous magical powers. And what's interesting about it is for this play, it shows him in a sympathetic light. Whereas if there's other plays of the time where if you look at Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus, or Robert Greene's Friar Bacon and Friar Bunke, which is also about a powerful wizard, they all either have their upcomits, like Faust has, he goes to hell, or in the case of Friar Bacon like gives up his magical practice. In the case of Prospero, he does kind of like retire. He says at the end he puts away his book, but he never does anything really bad. Whatever magic that he does is the intention behind it is he's not shown to be an evil person, like this evil wizard. And so that really, to me, shows, among many, many other things, shows that Thomas North was very sympathetic to this, and it also was very knowledgeable about it. And then the occult practices back then were very prevalent. It wasn't just like John Dee by himself. We have, one of the collaborators with Thomas North in the early versions of the plays was a poet named Edward Dyer. Now, later on in life, Edward Dyer did similar, practices with alchemy with Kelly. So Kelly, of course, as people know, was John Dee's partner in crime and all the work that he did. So, and this was after John Dee had worked with Kelly. So Edward Dyer was one of many people. Sir Walter Raleigh's half brother. There's an excellent book published by Scarlet Imprint. And I think it's, I'm forgetting the guy's name, Humphrey Gilbert, I think his name, was, but he had written a grimoire himself. Is the practices of witchcraft, of alchemy, and of astrology. Those three things was very prevalent back then. It was kind of seen. It was like sexuality. So people were very bisexual in those days, but it was sort of like it wasn't accepted because of the Christian dogma. But at the same time, people kind of knew it was there and it existed, and it was just as long as it was kind of like not too out in the public. And so witchcraft in astrology and alchemy were the same kind of domain. But that would all change with King James, who was petrified of those practices. But prior to King James, it was a very common experience for people to practice witchcraft, to deal with alchemy, and to be into astrology as well.
Yeah, I mean, John Dee worked for the Queen, so I mean, he was very much not an outsider, right? Like he was a member of court. So yeah, that's a great point. Okay, very cool. Fuck yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me about this. I'm looking forward to checking it out and to hearing more about the history and all of this good stuff when we talk about on Ad Hoc. Is there anything you want to mention that I didn't ask you about?
Well, just that, I think that if people have some reservations in terms of Shakespeare because he's this old dead white guy, I think we really should be revisiting him, or not him, but the works, which includes a lot, many different people, men and women, who contributed to these great works. Probably the greatest body of creative work ever written. Really, we have to understand how powerful this was, and not to just ignore it because it's just some dead old white guy. There's a lot there that is very relevant to our times, whether it be gender, sexuality, personal identity, and just people who are trying to be authentic. I think the biggest thing back then for Thomas North and his collaborators was, how can we be authentic human beings, and how can we get to the heart of human experience? And to this day, for me, the biggest thing for us is to try to be authentic, and to get to the heart of our human experience, and as technology becomes more and more dominant in our lives, the human experience is something we really, for me, should be cherishing and championing. And Thomas North and his collaborators were all about that.
Fuck yeah, I love it. So if anybody has a chance to read only one Shakespeare play, which one would you say they choose?
Hamlet.
Hamlet? Okay, fuck yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Derek, thank you so much for taking the time. Where can people find your work?
Sure. If you go to my website, it's love, so LOVE -chaos, CHAOS.com. So all my books are on there, links to get Anonymous, Agnostic, Antichrist, and my other previous books, Faust and many other ones, Divine Chaos, Parzival, a bunch of other books, but books about my philosophy, Love, Chaos, are all on there. So that would be the best place to go.
Fuck yeah, fuck yeah. All right, well, thank you so much, dude. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely, very much so. Thank you so much for having me on, Lexa.
Back toward the base. The object to the sun is still beaming down lights to the ground.
All right, thanks so much to Derek Hunter for joining me. You can find Anonymous, Agnostic, Antichrist, and his other work over at lovechaos.com. As he mentioned, there will be a link in the show notes to that. And check out my other conversation with Derek in episode 50, Kitchen Grimoires, Edible Cultism, and Erudite Hedonism with Melissa Madera, and Divine Chaos with Derek Hunter. As I mentioned, we're planning to have Derek on Ad Hoc History soon to get more in depth about all of that cool Shakespeare stuff, so stand by if you'd like to hear more on that. I'm actually taking a very interesting class right now through Morbid Anatomy, which I'm kind of addicted to, I think, with Dr. Diana Walsh-Bashalka, and in it we're discussing Plato's allegory of the cave and how this might be related to media narratives. In the allegory, who are the people making the shadow puppet show? So all types of media can be a sort of shadow puppet show in the way that they create worlds, which Plato would say do not actually take part in like being or actuality, only seeming or facsimile. Kind of pretend illusory or delusional worlds, if you will. He felt pretty mistrustful about the media of his time, as well as about those who produced a lot of it. He spent a super long time talking about it in Book 4 of the Republic, the text where the cave allegory is found. Anyway, I think he might have been on to something in terms of how we think about narrative and hypersigils and things like that as magicians. There is a relationship between the worlds we create through our artistic or magical, or whatever you want to call it, practices, and the greater world that we live in. This usually looks something like a positive feedback loop. There are lots of examples of how this happens. On the top of mind for me right now is the way that people think about the phenomenon. The way people experience encounters with high strangeness or other things like that is influenced by their context for it. This context is often provided by movies, TVs, books, radio, etc. So the more people experiencing things within this framework, the more other movies, TV shows, stories, etc. will be told within this context or paradigm. And as it gains popularity, it gains solidness. Solidarity as well as a solidness in the world, perhaps. While this happens, people's ideas about what it looks like, will continue to coalesce until it becomes, sort of cemented in the culture subconscious or whatever. Although I do think there are interesting and unexplainable, within our current paradigm at least, things about how this happens. I feel like the psychological model where we look at magic through a sort of lens of scientific materialism can explain things pretty well here. People in the marketing industry have been creating all manner of shadow plays that we're stuck watching, and they've given us some very, very fucking strange ideas about how the world operates. So I suspect tossing magic into this mix mostly aids in getting the ball rolling, bringing attention, and adding fuel to the feedback loop fire. But what do you all think? I'm curious to hear your thoughts about Shakespeare, hypersigils, and the rest of it. You can send missives for listener mail to luxoccultpod@gmail.com or find me at luxoccultpod on Instagram. I thought I should note for you all here that Derek did mention John Dee and Edward Kelly during the conversation. To hear more about them and the angels, listen to episode 36, Enochian Astrology and Math Magics with Cliff from Enochian Today. I'll put links to all those companion episodes in the show notes for y'all. We're going to be heading back to hear the rest of my conversation with Dr. Vanessa Sinclair in a moment here, as well as getting into that bibliomancy break. After the interview, I'll be back to share a few more magical musings, do shoutouts and listener mail, talk about 23, and give you an update about what we have going on over at the Green Mushroom Project. As we head into this bibliomancy break, I wanted to share a bit of a sound magic track I produced during the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction back in 2020, as I mentioned. Cheers. Enjoy. Alright, let's do some bibliomancy. Bibliomancy roll table pulled up here. Jupiter and Saturn can join, what will result from this coupling? What will emerge at the end of this mother's night? It looks like it's going to be from Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence. So you think there's no danger? Oh no. Not if trade was good, there wouldn't be. But if things were bad for a long spell, the young ones might go funny. I tell you, they're a selfish, spoilt lot. But I don't see how they'd ever do anything. They aren't ever serious about anything, except showing off on motorbikes and dancing at their palace to the songs in Sheffield. You can't make them serious. The serious ones dress up in evening clothes and go off to the tally to show off before a lot of girls and dance these new Charlestons and whatnot. I'm sure sometimes the bus will be full of young fellows in evening suits, collier lads off to the pally, let alone those that have gone with their girls in motors or on motorbikes. They don't give a serious thought to a thing, save Doncaster races and Derby. For all of them bet on every race. And football, and even football's not what it was, not by a long shot. It's too much like hard work, they say. No, they'd rather be off on motorbikes to Sheffield or Nottingham Saturday afternoons. This is just more shade at the generation I'm a part of. I feel personally attacked. Thank you, Eris. We are seated in the twin thrones of Gemini. Drawings are scepters. At our feet are six of victory. And through this darkest, longest night, the flame within shall be my light. And through this darkest, longest night, the flame within shall be my light. And through this darkest, longest night, the flame within shall be my light. Thank you so much for listening. Much love and happy solstice.
I love bibliomancy.
Me too. So the way that this works is I have a D4 and a D8 here, dice, and I'll ask you to ask the question, and I'll roll the dice, and we'll figure out what book we're going to be using, and then I will go and grab it.
Okay.
But you have a question for the Oracle.
Ooh. Is the proposal that was recently set out going to be accepted and lead to all the great things we hope it will?
Ooh, okay, exciting question. Will the proposal that was sent out recently be accepted and lead to all the fantastic things of which you are hoping? All right, this is going to be from A Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence. I will be right back here.
I like it.
Me too, I love this one. All right, I have returned with the text in my hand, Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence.
I love that you do it at the 23-minute mark. It's like,
oh, yes, that worked out nicely. Oh, Eris, please tell us, will the proposal that was sent out be accepted and lead to all of the wonderful things that are hoped for? To show off before a lot of girls and dance these new Charlestons and whatnot. I'm sure sometimes the bus'll be full of young fellows in evening suits, collier lads off to the Philly, let alone those that have gone with their girls in motors or in motorbikes.
I like that. There's a lot of people there.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that's a good sign.
I have chills because this is almost the exact thing that I pulled in another bibliomancy that I did about 3 years ago with this book. I think it's like that exact phrase. I'll have to go back and listen to the Sound Magic track that I made. But there is some kind of an interesting connection between that and what just happened just now. So absorbing that in this moment. But okay,
that's a good sign too.
I think so. So to dress up, to show off, I'm not sure what kind of a proposal this is, but it's possible that this is something that a lot of people are traveling towards in some way. I'm seeing motorbikes, buses, people dancing the Charleston and whatnot. So it sounds like a party to me.
It does sound like a party. I like it. And then fancy clothes, black tie. That's good. That's very good. Thank you.
So I was hoping that while I have you here, and I do have my cut-up box that I created while taking your class. I was hoping that we might be able to do a quick little cut-up together.
Let's do it.
All right. How about you start?
Okay. Got my cut-up bag right here. Blitzkrieg, the citadel of enlightenment. Painters first suggested the means were at hand more than 50 years ago. That's from Burroughs and Geison's The Third Mind.
Buddhist Buddha Vista Gudazani. Death, Sexuality, and Violence. That was from a calendar that I cut up.
Many contemporary artists continue to work.
Resources and public.
Is one objection to the cut-ups. There's been a lot of that, a sort of superstitious reverence for the word. My God, they say, you.
I am the blood.
Ready for business, it is written by me. Oh, that's a good place to end. I like that.
Fuck yeah, thank you so much. Well, I'm looking forward to going back when I do the production of this and really sinking my teeth into that. That was very cool. Appreciated.
And that also, I think, fits nicely with the bibliomancy.
I think so too.
I like it. And I like this idea of this piece I pulled from The Third Mind. I should also mention what The Third Mind is. It's a book that William Burroughs and Brian Geisen wrote together that came out in 1978. That's basically their cut of experiments outlined from like 1958 to 1978. And they both worked with the method for the rest of their lives, but they specifically like had certain experiments they did where they were like, okay, what happens if we cut the page this way? What happens if we do it this way? And they kind of write about what their thoughts were with each experiment they designed and then what the results were. And they just laid them out in this wonderful book, The Third Mind. It's great. This message from it that says there's been almost like a superstitious reverence for the word. It's so true, because I gave a talk about cut-ups at this art school in the U.S. in Baltimore. And I had the students like bring in something that they like to cut up, like bring in whatever, a writer that you like or something you've written or anything that you want. And it was really hard for some people to cut it up. And one person actually like was like, I have to put it all back together, and had to sit there and like re-put the words back where they belong. She got so upset about it. And I thought that was really interesting as well. Like this reverence for the word, or like when I like, sometimes when Carl and I have both bought, the same book, as we have done many times clearly in our lives, I'll like cut up the double, because it's like, well, we don't need two of this book. And like, sometimes it's very hard, even if you have another of the same book in the house, or like, we'll be like, well, that's a slightly different edition, and I don't know if I should cut it up. And or magazines, you're not going to be able to use the pictures on both sides, but that's just something, you have to make those little sacrifices when you work.
Yeah, and there's something interesting there. You said sacrifice, and then there's also this idea that we talked about in your class about breaking this taboo, right? And the power that can be found in exploring those types of things too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I remember that guy who had cut up all these books, and he kept like finding things in them. And he said like all the books in his house had like parts cut out of them. That was really interesting as well.
One of my fellow students was deeply into it and had a really fascinating practice surrounding it that, it was very mind-blowing, honestly. I was like, wow, this is deep down the rabbit hole, and I respect that.
Yeah, and I love he was like a neurosurgeon or something, that like retired and then started making cut-ups, which is also interesting. It's like he's still slicing, right? But now he's slicing up books and words, and it's super interesting because he wanted to know like if we'd seen any other artists that did it like the same way that he did it. And, that never happens. I think they're like really unique to each person. You kind of end up developing your own method. And that's why, people often are like, well, how do I do it? Does it have to be each word, or do you cut out phrases? Or do you pay attention to what you're cutting out? And the answer is like, you can do it any which way. Like, experiment with different things. When I started, I was cutting out individual words like Tristan Zara, and I would never move them from where they fell. I'm like, no, that's the way the cut up gods wanted it to be, and that would be how it was. And now it's like, sometimes I'm like, well, the poem would kind of flow better if I like moved this phrase and this phrase or something, or took this phrase out because it's like, from a recipe or something, or a date that seems annoying or something like that. Yeah, so I'll like fidget with them a little bit. And Burroughs absolutely, used creative license. He'd like use the cut up method to an extent, but then he would edit it to make it flow. And so did David Bowie, So, that's what you do after a time, then that's okay too. Or if you want to remain a purist and just always leave it exactly the way it was, that's also okay. I have a whole bunch of different projects, like people that I work with, that I cut up their writing and my writing, and I put them in tiny boxes that I got at like little antique stores or thrift stores that I like. And then I like let them incubate in there. So it's like I'm working on something with little Annie. So then I have like my words and little Annie's words in this little incubator box, or my words and Val Denham's words, or my words and Carl's, And that's what I like to do. I like to let them kind of work on themselves while I'm not actively working.
I love that idea. Very cool.
Yeah, and my friend Caitlin, who used to do cut-ups with a lot, like before I met Carl, she actually talked about and really like opened my eyes to how magical they can be, because before I was thinking them more of like I thought of it more from a psychoanalytic perspective. And like, I feel like in the work of psychoanalysis, you're trying to like locate stories that you tell yourself that you've inherited maybe from your parents or society about how you should be or how you are or things like that. Locate them and interrogate them and cut them up and like rearrange yourself so that you can be, you know, more fully the way you feel you want to be without being like constrained by these kind of narratives that you've been born into. So I was seeing kind of cut-ups as that way, like physically getting to like cut up the narrative, you know? But then Caitlin kind of showed me how magical they were in a different way, where she said she like, you know, she really liked like Patti Smith and the guy who wrote the Basketball Diaries. I can't remember his name right now, but anyway, she was really into them.
I want to say.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Carol. She was cutting up their writing, and then like she went to like go to some concert festival to write for her like little zine or whatever she was doing in high school, you know. And then she ended up like backstage with Jim Carroll and Patti Smith, you know, and she was like, wow, I manifested this interaction, you know. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, the way to think about it as well. So if there's someone you're like really into or something like that, someone you want to work with, like try cutting up your words with their words. You never know what could happen. And of course, with our friends that have passed on, you know, a lot of them, like Genesis and Lady J, believed in life after death and that you still have your spirit. So if you want to work with them, you know, cut up their writing, cut up their song lyrics and mix it with yours. And you'll be able to talk to them that way.
Fuck yeah, I love that. I was thinking too about this idea of, and I think that Jen wrote about this in Psychic Bible, like this idea of there being true, like new layers of truth that can be revealed by performing a cut up on a piece of writing. So if it's something that you really love and you really are into, like you might be able to find different layers of meaning in it by doing this cut up method too, I think.
Absolutely. And Burroughs would say you cut through to see what, like what's really there, you know, see what it really says. And he also said, let the future leak out, because he thought they could be premonitory as well.
Very cool. I love that. So while we're on the topic of Tofi and Jen and everybody, I'm kind of curious, you know, the work has been so influential in a culture and probably general broader culture and music and art and places. I'm curious how you see that continuing on in the future and what kind of ways that might look.
Yeah, I think that Jen's work now is like just getting really started in a way, because now crossed over, they're united with Jay the way they wanted to be without their bodies. And they honestly seem like more of a presence and stronger than ever, which is, yeah, really wonderful to see and watch kind of unfold as more and more people become aware of their work. And like you said, it's getting more into mainstream culture, and Magick's more into mainstream culture, and trans and bending gender and bending identity is more in mainstream culture. So like all these ideas that, you know, when Jen was doing them embodied, were really like far out, you know, really a culture or like, you know, out there for mainstream. Now it's like totally part of mainstream discourse. And I remember like right before Jen dropped her body, she would see people's emails saying like she, her at the bottom, or them there on the bottom, things like that. And she was like really blown away by that. Like, look, people are writing that on their emails now. Like, this is really a huge change, and it really is. So I think with, the more mainstream acceptance of like changing gender and identity being malleable, and having more of a sense of like having a multiplicity of identity, even like with they, them, and then having Magick be more mainstream. Some people still poo-poo it, but more and more people are really like, you know, we've always believed in this. Humanity's believed in magic forever. So like, you know, the section of humanity that hasn't has been such short-lived compared to the thousands of years of people who have believed in it. So I think with all of that, it's just going to be more and more integrated. Yeah. And I think it's really necessary at this point because, you know, I heard someone say today, they called, you know, like being in professional dress for work, work drag. I love that. I was like, that's amazing. You know? Yeah.
This is a character I play at work.
Yeah, exactly. It's work drag. I was like, that is perfect. I love this, you know? So now that there's like more and more like people are thinking this way, you know, that's great because, you know, people are weird, people are varied, you know, people have so many different characteristics and it's wonderful. The weirdness is wonderful and this like society that's tried to like make everyone so like normal and fit into this little box really just has no place, and it's been super destructive. And it's like any argument that point of view can make, it's like, excuse me, you're like literally destroying our habitat. So like, they really don't have a leg to stand on at this point. And I think that's really important because it's like a critical time, clearly, and people need to wake up, basically. And I think Jen's work and the Kata method and Pandrogyny and Topi's having a resurgence where people are more and more interested in Topi again. I think it's because people need these ideas. Even psychoanalysis is having more of a resurgence. And I think it's because of this positioning that I was saying, like, we need to take more agency. We need to realize that we have power. We need to realize that we can do something, even if it's like, okay, you can't change the world and all the politics and everything, but if you can change, this inner dialogue that you have and interrogate these inner narratives that you've inherited, that you're keeping yourself oppressed by because of your social conditioning, that helps by breaking that down within yourself. And I really feel like, the reason Carl and I talk about this kind of stuff so much is like, the more people encounter people that are doing that, I feel like it inspires and has this kind of effect where like the water drop where it can ripple out, and it can help people be like, I can practice magic and be a doctor, be a psychoanalyst, and make weird art. Like, that's a thing that you can do. Because, like, I didn't know that was a thing I could do. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, that's a thing you can do. I'm doing it. So I hope that more, like, analysts and psychologists and stuff coming up also can, like, continue to do their art and stuff. Because at first, like, when I was, like, little baby doctor right out of school, I've always been, like, had boyfriends in bands and things like that, and always been, like, on little records and indie labels and things. But I, like, actually, like, actively, like, made Discogs like take my name off of things when I first became a doctor, because I was like, I can't have people Googling me and like seeing all this weird music that I make, because I had internalized this thing that's not professional. That is counter to my work drag. I cannot do that. I have to be this other person now. Right. And I actually made this, and they're like, we don't do that. And I was like, you need to take it off. and they did. But now it's like, now I'm not credited on all these things because I made them take it off. But anyway, but I did that. It's just like, I don't want other people to have to do that. That's a small thing, but like, I had to like refine my creativity and refine my magic after it had been like beaten out of me through my training and my socialization of what you need to do to become a psychologist in the United States. I hope that people don't have to go through that, and they can bring their whole selves to work. They can bring their whole selves to their lives without having to compartmentalize themselves in these kinds of ways,
Yeah, fuck yeah, absolutely. And that's actually a really inspirational story. Like, thank you for sharing about that journey. I appreciate it.
Of course.
So I have a question, and this is, forgive me, a little bit of a selfish one, listeners. This has to do with my own work, but I'm hoping to get Dr. Sinclair's perspective on this. So one of the things that I began doing pretty shortly after I started working with the Topi sigil of 3 liquids technique back in like 2020 was to really look at these sexual fantasies that you're asked to kind of think about as part of doing this work, and to kind of begin to analyze them, like their themes, their narratives, like what symbolic elements were there, and in what ways do they like rhyme with other parts of my life, like what are the kind of overarching archetypes that I see there and stuff. And I know that Freud has the reputation for like really looking at dreams and conducting analysis on dreams, and so I was kind of thinking about this as perhaps being a little bit of a similar in some ways. I'm hoping you might be able to comment on that.
Absolutely. And that's how psychoanalysis started, was Freud looking at his dreams and analyzing them and finding these kinds of patterns and themes and things like that. And that's his first major work. It was called The Interpretation of Dreams, and it was published in 1899. And, he very much said it was like important that it was at the turn of the century, and he wanted to be like a man of the coming century, of the future, But, he's, of course, the first analyst in that way, and he never was analyzed by anyone else. He did it himself. He also did it through writing letters, which I think is a really interesting way to do it as well. And you don't have to actually send letters to anyone, but like if there's like, say, a magician, someone that you feel like has mentored you magically or something like that, you could actually just like write them letters as if you're writing to this, in the way it's like the analytic positioning I was talking about. Like, you have the analyst there as the person who's supposedly the authority, or the person that's helping you, that you're looking to for the answers. And you basically just talk to them, for the session for an hour. So you could do that same thing through letters, like telling someone, how you're feeling, what's going, what your thoughts are. And you could even do it, like I did my own self-analysis for a while using the voice recorder on my phone. And I would literally lay on the couch and like press the record button and then like talk to myself on the couch about what was going on, and did my own kind of self-analysis that way. And for some reason, there's something about humans that like having this, person that you're addressing, it does change the narrative a bit than if you're just addressing yourself, like in your own thoughts and things like that. If you're like speaking to what we call the other, and the other is like in Lacan, the big other. It's like, what God probably came out of this idea of like one God, or the parents, how you see your mother or your father is like God when you're a little kid, things like that. Like talking to that big authority in the sky, imaginary authority. It does something a little bit different than when you're just like thinking in your own kind of rumination. So you could do it that way, like write letters or talk out loud, or in any way you want to work to someone who's mentored you in that way. And like I mentioned, if you're doing the 3 liquids and the sigils, you might want to talk to Jen. Like, Jen is super available. Like Jen and Jay are like wonderful to work with and talk to. And it's been really interesting in my journey. Like, I didn't know Jay in life, but Carl did. But like, I knew Jay through Jen. And like, it's been interesting to see like the transition between like them when they were living and now, because when you see someone you like know personally kind of turn into an ancestor, it's really like, it's just such a wild perspective to see kind of how it works. Because of course, like there are these like helping spirits or guides or people who are like help people, or artists always have artists who inspire them, and they often feel like they're like communicating with them even if they're dead and things like that, or they don't know them, because it just seems to be these kinds of magical or creative lineages. And Jen and Jay, they're super like available to work with. They're wonderful to work with. Jay's also like, don't forget about Jay. She's wonderful. She's very into the body. If you like anything kink or S&M or anything like that, bondage, she was a dominatrix and also a nurse, and she's just really fun to play with in that way.
Yeah, a really powerful person, I think.
Yeah, she's amazing. So definitely always want to make sure she gets the attention she deserves. Yeah, and she's wonderful. And yeah, so they're always there. But if there's someone particular you like to work with, like my friend Caitlin loves burros, and she works with burros a lot. I love Geisen, work with Geisen a lot. So any kind of artist that you feel like is in your kind of magical or creative lineage, you can communicate with them. I like to make oils to different artists that I like. Like I have one for John Balance, Peter Christopherson, Jen and Jay, Burroughs and Geisen, all these kinds of the cut up crew, and sometimes you could put the oil on and then like do the magical work with them. Those kinds of things work really well.
Fuck yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. Is there any questions that I didn't ask, or anything that you want to mention that I didn't ask about, or are there any questions you would like to ask me?
Well, it's been really fun to chat, and yeah, I think the big takeaways is just like, I feel like everybody should just take away the idea of like, you're not dependent on other people for answers to things or to like progress in your life and things like that. And it's like, I feel like there's way too much searching for someone else that has the answers. And I think that holds people back a lot, just thinking that they don't know enough. They're not the authority. I know people that were like going to go to the recent Occulture conference, but didn't feel like they knew enough or didn't have a degree in this thing. It's like, since when do you need a degree in magic? It's like, it's just like,
real.
Just like do the magic. Just because magic is big in academia right now, and this like study of alternative religions or whatever, like that should not take precedence over the people that are the magicians. I'm sorry. Yeah. Like it's fun to like learn the history and this like stuff like that from like an anthropological perspective, but at the end of the day, you just got to do it, and you don't have to know exactly how to do it. Just do what it feels intuitive for you. Like people, the witches in the forest on the outskirts of the villages for centuries and millennia did not have books. They weren't referring to other people. They were just making magic, making their herbs. Of course, people might have mentored them along the way, but like you didn't need to like know the history of everything to be able to do stuff.
They operated outside of the confines of this authority structure, where
yes,
very much is the authority structure, right?
Thank you. Thank you. Exactly. This idea of who the expert is really needs to go, in my opinion. I don't like it.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. So that's what I would say. Just please take that away. Work with whoever resonates with you. Do it however you feel works best for you. There is no right or wrong way to do it. Just do it. Lacan says something that's thought is inhibited action. Don't sit and think about it. Just do it. And if you don't like the way it turned out, then do it different next time. It's okay. Or Lady J says, see a cliff, jump off. Just do it.
Okay. Well, where can listeners find your vast array of very interesting work? You've got so much cool stuff out there. I'll list it before I introduce you, of course, but where can people find all of that?
I guess my main website, drvanessasinclair.net, has links to everything on different pages. I have a podcast, Rendering Unconscious, where I talk to different psychoanalysts and occultists and artists and things. And then Carl and I have a Patreon, patreon.com/Vanessa23Carl. That's really like our creative hub, because social media is like, there's so many ads and stuff now, since like Instagram wants you to pay or whatever. If you don't, they show you like endless ads, and
people
I can't
getting their pages taken down or saying that only followers can see them is something I keep seeing. And so I don't know what's going on. Yes, that makes sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of censorship. It's, everything's going to the people, the corporations, the things that can pay, Oh yeah, my Instagram, nobody sees it because all my art has cutouts from Playboy and stuff like that. And even if I just show a butt or something, they're like, oh, that's against community standards. And I end up getting shadow banned or whatever it's called forever.
Well, so all kinds of advertisements of people putting lotion on their butts, and that's okay, right? Like, so I don't understand.
It's ridiculous. But they're paying to do it.
You have to pay to put that stuff.
Yeah, so we've made it like a Discord from our Patreon, and that's been much nicer because we can chat with people, and we both like check it every day and answer any questions and chat with people that way. And so that's nice. And we do the sigil ritual on the 23rd of every month on our Patreon, and like write a bit about that. And everybody does it on their own. It's not something we do together like in a Zoom or anything, but we talk about our experiences, and Carl and I write every Monday. We call it Magic Monday, where we write about our magical practices. And it's basically just inspired kind of the same way we did the class, where just every week we're like, what are we working on this week? And we just write about it so that it's very kind of natural flow, and you can see our creative process. And then every year at the end of the year, we collect those together, and we've been making books out of them for people who want to like have them all in one place. So that's been kind of fun to see these like little magical grimoires that come out of our Patreon posts. And then Carl's been wanting to write more these kind of like just like his thoughts of the week, like weekly musing. So he's been posting like a little essay every Friday as well. So you get a lot on our Patreon, honestly. There's like 2 things that are exclusive content every week, plus the Discord. And yeah, and it's nice. It's like, I like the Discord because it's like old social media. It's like old chat rooms, like before the ads and all this stuff, where you could just like look at a thread and chat with people that have similar interests, and not have all this like, people screaming at you, or people mad, or ads and things. It's much better.
Totally. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Well, Dr. Sinclair, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. This has been fantastic. I hope you'll consider possibly coming back sometime.
Of course.
All right, folks. Yeah, thanks so much to Dr. Sinclair for joining me. Check out the show notes for links to her award-winning podcast and she and Carl Abrahamson's Patreon, and her impressive array of other work. There's a lot to think about in this conversation. The notion of the cut-up technique being something which is very generative resonates strongly for me. In a biological sense, the process of sexual reproduction exists for the purposes of creating genetic cut-ups. That's essentially what genetic recombination is, in a way. Each organism arrived at via these means is a sort of collage of genetic materials from its predecessors. This informational lineage stretches all the way back in time to when life arose here on this planet. At least as far as we can tell. This is debated, of course. But we assume that we all came from the same soup. I'm proud to be part of the family. Another primordial ooze I'm proud to be a part of is the Green Mushroom Podcast Network. Don't forget to check out our other great shows. We've got Administrism, Agnostics, Primordia, Ad Hoc History, Smuts Up, Unearthing Paranormalcy, XV Planus, and Camera Occulta. All very cool stuff. So during our conversation, Vanessa brought up a lot of cool points and some really great tips about praxis. The idea of making energetic oils has always appealed to me as being an accessible way of instilling intent or energetic resonance or whatever you want to call it into a physical container or vessel. Crystals and salt, which is also a crystal by the way, are also classic choices for this type of work as well. But oil can be applied to the body and to other places like a candle. You can actually see some of the things that you put into it too, which can be aesthetically significant for some people. I'm still unpacking the bibliomancy thing that I mentioned earlier. In the audio sigil I played for you all before the last part of the interview, I asked the question, when Jupiter and Saturn conjoin, what will result from this coupling? What will emerge at the end of this Mother's Night? Mother's Night is, of course, the first night of Yule, which was the context in which I asked the question. And now, of course, 3 years later, the answer pops back up again amid a very difficult-to-ignore array of synchronous events. Stuff is popping up. Magic is like that sometimes. I don't want to bore you all with the details, but things are getting fucking weird again lately, and I'm here for it. When this happens, it's a good idea to remind oneself to stay balanced, regardless of how exciting or intriguing things might be. It's easy to get swept up in thinking about connections and stuff. But there's typically a law of diminishing returns there in terms of time and effort spent versus insight gained. Lots to consider, but I thought I should mention that in case anybody else has a tendency to get swept up in things. There's so many things about a magical practice which are a balancing act, and for me this is definitely one of them. Speaking of cut-ups, and also the number 23, which I will be getting more into in just a bit here, 23 Bibliomancy is a sort of giant cut-up. Book 18 of our 23-book scripture will be discovered today, the 23rd. You can read more about the 23 Bibliomancy experiment at greenmushroomproject.com or find a link to it in the show notes. It's essentially the 23rd line of the 23rd page of whatever book the participant wants to bring, and then we roll dice to figure out what order these lines will appear in. It's been quite fascinating so far. More Green Mushroom Project updates. We performed the All Out of Bubblegum ceremony on Friday the 19th, which was the official kickoff for Project Specs. Shout out to everybody who hung out for that. It was cool to see some new people joining in. Thanks so much to Fedor Damiana for taking point on that, and to Guillermo X for the assist. And greetings to everybody who will be conducting the operation to enchant sunglasses and other items on their own as well. Find a link to that in the show notes, on the Discord server, or at greenmushroomproject.com. Project Specs is an ongoing magical working we're going to be doing to help us see through all the propaganda and other bullshit. It's thematically based on the 1988 film written and directed by John Carpenter, They Live. Put on the glasses. We've got a lot of other stuff scheduled and more in the works to come. Join us for our weekly Friday chat. This week, Shane Shadow Eater will share his thoughts about men's work circles, initiation, archetypal journey work, and that fucking shadow, which is his words. Next week on the 2nd of February, I'll be hosting another chat about the personalized approach to conducting planetary magic I've been developing for the last couple of years. I'm calling it Zodiacal Pathworking. I've been playing with some new components that I'm excited to share with y'all. On the 9th, Laura will be hosting a talk about the Thunder Perfect Mind. Join us also for our monthly rune study group, 6 Ways by Aidan Wachter Book Club, as well as for the 23 Bibliomancy experiment on the 23rd. Well, at least until the thing is completed. There's about 6 more months left. And on the 24th of the month, check out 24 Cinema Score, hosted by Armored, where we hang out and make fun of campy old horror movies. We're also going to be doing more chats about critical thinking and logical fallacies and stuff like that coming down the line here as well. As always, these fun and free activities are open to anyone, unless we've had to ban you for some reason, and hosted on the Green Machine Discord server. Greetings and much love to the entire Pocket Wizard family. Much love and much love to everybody participating in the Green Mushroom Project, regardless of what that looks like for you and your practice. You can find Lux Occult, Hello Void, and other merch available at illuminindustries.com, which is my Etsy store. Items will be printed on demand using the most eco-friendly options I could find and shipped directly to you at pretty close to cost. And there's some very fun stuff there, including the Hello Void design that T.A. Grady, aka Mirth and Woe on Instagram, designed for me. You can check out his other cool work in the Myco-Cultus working. He was the illustrator for that. If you're into the show and you like what I've got going on over here, you can support it on Patreon. Making this thing is a pretty wild amount of work, especially for just one intrepid podcaster, but it means a lot to me to be able to do it. Thank you so much to the people who are making that possible by giving on Patreon or buy me a coffee, and the people who are supporting the show by spreading the word. Giving it a positive review or some stars can be a great way to get the word out there, but word of mouth is always best, so posting about it on social media or anything like that always helps a lot. And thank you so much to everybody who is already doing that. And yes, don't forget to smash the shit out of that follow or alarm button or whatever it is on your app so you can get updates about when new episodes come out. After I talk nerdy to you about number 23, I'm going to close the episode with a special treat for you all. A song which TheTomO'Bedlam recorded, which was inspired in part by the last episode of the show, called The Magician and the Machine, featuring Eric J. Millar and Mademoiselle Vendredi. There was a lot that I could relate to in this little track that TheTomO'Bedlam shared, which, makes sense, right, given how it came about. But I thought that some of you all might enjoy it as much as I do. Shout out and big thanks to TheTomO'Bedlam for creating it, sharing it, and allowing me to play it here. Check the show notes for a link to TheTomO'Bedlam's work. Let's do some more listener mail and shout outs. Shout out to Frank, who lets me know that the show has allowed for countless hours of the passage of time in a pickup truck, traveling across country, installing equipment for solar energy developers. Cheers, Frank. Safe travels, and thanks so much for listening and for the support. I appreciate it. Greetings to Alexia on Instagram. Very fun lore about orcs being red from eating blood sausages and whatnot. Very enjoyable. Greetings to June. Thank you so much for all of the laughs. Greetings and thanks so much for the kind words and support to Stevie, who has some nice things to say about the Patricia McCormick episode. I really enjoyed that one, and it gave me a lot to think about too. Thank you so much for checking that out. Greetings to Douglas Batchelor from the What Magic Is This podcast, to Naya Ein from the Church of Nothing and Coven, and to Aidan Wachter. Stoked to be recording some conversations with y'all soon. Shout out also to Keats Ross over at wethehollow.org and the Prag Magick podcast. He's put together a pretty cool magical tool recently, which I will tell you a little bit about here. From Prag Magick creator and perpetual fuck-up, his words, Revel Ross, comes the Divergent Magic Anarchic Grimoire, a workbook which offers a framework to create, construct, disrupt, and rejuvenate the rites and rituals that form your personal lore. It's divergent because it doesn't adhere to a single current, reflecting the diverse nature of each person's individuation process. Additionally, it's divergent because the creator is a neurodivergent schemer, always seeking to merge the pragmatic with the magical. The Grimoire's 40-plus ritual cycles encompass metaphysical frameworks for various aspects, be it artistic projects, health habits, or creating deconstructing magical rituals. Each rite cycle can delve into the neurotic details of a single step, making the grimoire a major rite in itself. The only rule? Customize everything. Let this tool assist your anarchic praxis in ritualizing the mundane, echoing the profane, and resonating with the sacred rites that shape your personal lore. Hardbacks are available on Amazon now with soft covers to come. You can contact pragmagic@gmail.com to be part of the Grimoire's own deconstruction and rebirth. All right, fuck yeah. Keith's birthday is on the 23rd of February, just a couple days after mine. Shout out to him and all the other 23 babies out there listening. All right, let's hear a little bit about that number from the foremost source of scholarly information, Wikipedia. 23 is the natural number following 22 and preceding 24. In mathematics, 23 is the 9th prime number, the smallest odd prime that is not a twin prime. It is, however, a cousin prime with 19 and a sexy prime with 17 and 29, while also being the largest number of the first prime sextuplet 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, 23. 23 is also the 5th factorial prime, the 2nd Woodall prime, and a happy number in decimal. It is an Einstein prime and is also the 5th Sophie Germain prime and the 4th Safe prime, and is the next to last member of the Cunningham chain. Where religion is concerned, in biblical numerology it is associated with Psalm 23, also known as the Shepherd Psalm. It is possibly the most quoted and best known psalm. Psalms is also the 23rd book in the Durey Rhymes Bible. In Islam, the Quran was revealed in a total of 23 years to Muhammad. Muslims believe the first verses of the Quran were revealed to the Islamic prophet Muhammad on the 23rd night of the 9th Islamic month, though this is disputed. Principia Discordia, the sacred text of Discordianism, holds that 23, along with the Discordian prime 5, is the sacred number of Eris, goddess of discord. Hail Eris, all hail Discordia. In other fields, the phrase 23 skidoo is American slang popularized during the 20th century, and one of the most popular fad expressions to appear in the US. Honestly, still don't understand what it means, by the way. The 23 enigma proposed by William S. Burroughs plays a prominent role in the plot of the Illuminatus trilogy by Robert Shea and Robert Anton Wilson. A very fun read if you like campy, raunchy old stuff like that. The 23 in South Africa refers to the 23 conscientious objectors who publicly refused to do military service in the apartheid army in 1987. The following years, the number increased to 143 in 1988 and 771 in 1989, with apartheid being dismantled from 1990 onwards. X-23 is a character in the Marvel Universe. She is named after being the 23rd attempt to create a female genetic twin of Wolverine after attempts to create a male clone failed. No comment. 23 is the number of times Julius Caesar was stabbed in the theater of Pompeii at 2 Brute. In science and technology, the atomic number of Validium is 23. The atomic mass number of the stable isotope of sodium is also 23. Normal human sex cells have 23 chromosomes. Other human cells have 46 chromosomes arranged in 23 pairs. 23 is the width of the Akribo message sent to space in search of extraterrestrial intelligence. And last, but of course not least, the Earth's axis is tilted at approximately 23 degrees. Alright, cheers. Thanks to Wikipedia, and happy 23rd to you, or a very good day whenever you hear this. This episode will be published at 2300 hours local time here in celebration of the number, as well as a tribute to the Temple of Psychic Youth and the Sigil of 3 Liquids technique. Something, by the way, that I began messing around with around the time that conjunction I mentioned. Do you fetishize the number 23 or any other number? Write to me at luxoccultpod@gmail.com or message me on Instagram at luxoccultpod to let me know. Alright, I'd like to return real quick to the notion of work drag that Vanessa brought up in the interview. I love that. I sort of contextualize all clothes as being some type of costume. These costumes typically have some kind of a narrative property to them. They tell stories and influence the way that others see us and the way that we think about ourselves. This can be a big aspect of glamour magic for some people. There can be overlays of costumes upon costumes too, layers of meaning that speak to gender and class and history, as well as of personal preference or ideology. This goes way deeper than clothes as well. The taxonomy of it would be quite complex and full of interlocking definitions. These definitions exist largely as part of an external structure which is greater than the individual, is often dictated to the individual. Dr. Sinclair touched on this a little bit. A question perhaps worth asking is, what would it feel like to remove some of the definitions that you have about yourself? What is under all those costumes and the stories you heard about who you supposedly are or should be? There is much to suggest that this is likely a moving target, something which is continuously in flux, like pretty much everything else, I suppose. The pursuit of what is under the costumes and the definitions is a never-ending journey, and that this journey of discovery is a worthy destination, at least for me. Whatever journeys, discovery or otherwise, you may be on right now, may the road rise to meet you. Alright, I will leave you with the track The Magician and the Machine by TheTomO'Bedlam. Check out the show notes for a link to Tom's music. I especially like the part in this song where it says, "That's probably not what you meant when you asked me how I was." I can absolutely relate to that sentiment. Regardless of how awkward social encounters may become, let me remind you to resist. Resist by maintaining sovereignty of the self. Resist by maintaining love of the self. Resist by maintaining fierce loyalty to love and pleasure. Resist with acts of radical kindness. Focus on the path. Better times. Fuck yeah. Thank you so much to Dr. Vanessa Sinclair and to Derek Hunter for joining me today. Thanks to TheTomO'Bedlam and to everyone who contributed tracks to the digital mixtape. Thanks to everybody who has assisted, both seen and unseen. And most of all, thanks so much to you for listening. Much love. This is Lux Estrada, reminding you to stay strong and stay fucking curious. Here's The Magician and the Machine by TheTomO'Bedlam. Cheers.
Hear the voices all around and take your place in the machine. You can keep the wheels turning, you can keep the rollers clean. Just keep your mind material, your body smooth and lean. And no one wants to hear about your dreams. Because dreams are made of nothing more than tiny grains of sand slipping through the fingers of our outstretched, grasping metal hands. They infiltrate the casings of the bearings of the fan that cools the computers calculating future plans. And if the fans stop running and the heat begins to rise and the nest of silicon serpents begins to hiss and writhe, the data turns to gibberish cast stripped of its disguise. How will we keep convincing all the gears we're really wise? And if the gears start asking why it's they who ever turn, until their teeth are all worn down by the constant churn, they may release their grip on the axles where they burn. Rising find they've tongues to speak and minds with which to learn. And when the drums go silent and the factory shuts down, what then is the technician but an out-of-practice clown? All these pieces freed from hurry up and trying not to drown may realize they never needed us to hold them down. And the ones with feathered wings may launch and soar on high, while others just as honored turn their faces from the sky. Some may trace the patterns in the trees while others lie on lazy rivers while the reeds dance with grateful sighs. The factories they crumbled neath the weight of earnest ants, and the lovers in their laughing all left off wearing pants, and no one thought them naughty but rose to join the dance. Voices interwoven raw and grateful for the chance. Or that's what I recall before my alarm clock woke me up. I shaved still half asleep and sloshed some coffee in my cup. Made it here, miracle I didn't cause a pile up. Which maybe wasn't what you meant when you asked me, "Sup, Hope you take this anyway. Just reach out your hand. Close your eyes and take it. I trust you'll understand. I didn't wake to a beautiful call or an angel's flaming brand. All I have to offer you are these few grains of sand. There's voices all around say take your place in the machine. You can keep the wheels turning. You can keep their rollers clean. Just listen when they tell you how to see beyond their screens. And always hold on closely to the lessons in your dreams.
Lux Occult is part of the Green Mushroom Podcast Network.
What scares you?
Ghosts. Aliens.
Monsters?
The occult. Conspiracies?
Some of you like to be scared, and unearthing paranormalcy is for you.
Some of you try everything you can to avoid it. Unearthing paranormalcy is for you.
We take the topics that scare some, and we dig in to find the source, then present the history to make the paranormal a little more normal.
We also throw in a bit of comedy to shed a light on some of the darkness in the world.
So whether you're scared of bumps in the night, what's inside your own mind, or strange lights in the sky, we cover it all.
We dig in and present all that we find and try to come up with some logical
and not so logical
reasons for the high strangeness happenings.
Sometimes we are scared of the things we don't understand, and the more we understand, the less we fear.
So find us, Unearthing Paranormalcy, on your favorite podcast app, and join us on Facebook, Instagram, and Discord at UMP Normalcy. And until next time,
keep digging.